Shalom Israel, and I want to welcome every seed of Abraham to this podcast today. I'm very, very delighted to be here, bringing you words as a Igbo Jewish prophet and high priest, and therefore the chief press secretary of God, Hashem Adonai. I want to congratulate Israel, first of all, for having some of the heavy hitters, some of the most powerful countries in the world affirm and validate Israel as its eternal undivided capital. And I'm hoping and praying too that some other nations will join in transferring their capital from Tel Aviv or somewhere else to Jerusalem. I'm particularly talking about Nigeria. Nigerian government should consider transferring our capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Nigeria has to be aware of the fact that Igbo Jews are almost 80 million in number, both the ones in the mainland Nigeria and the ones in the diaspora. So it's only fitting and sensible to, on the account of our strength alone, over 80 million, people have articulated Igbo Jewish population as 40 million to 50 million. There's no reliable count in Nigeria, but we estimate reliably that we're approximately 80 million people, and I'm going to get to that in the course of this podcast. Today, what Hashem has asked me to speak about is the sheer number, the mass proliferation of Igbo Jewish synagogues in Nigeria, particularly after the botched genealogical or genealogy testing, in which some Messianic groups reduced Igbos to Gentiles. They say Igbos are no longer Jews. They have now categorized us within the rubric of a Gentile nation, so as a result of this, because of this very, very fundamentally unfair ancestry testing, many Igbos have started, running out of churches and then, filling up synagogues. And this, to me, seems to be represents a sort of an outpost of resistance. The sheer number of Igbos, opening up, founding their own synagogues, not just in Nigeria but in South Africa and elsewhere, speaks to the fact that they will not capitulate to any intimidation of, by any group or by any Jewish group, particularly the Messianic bent of, denying them their Jewish heritage and ancestry. I have, in my YouTube channel, I've established two playlists. One chronicling of, kind of coagulating and consolidating all the videos that demonstrate the number of Igbos dancing in their synagogues, celebrating in their temples and other places of worship. Most of them have their signature white, garment. It's not a white garment church. This is not a church. This is a synagogue. And many of them, have established synagogues just to prove that they are not ready to capitulate, based off of anybody's DNA testing, because DNA testing has been discredited, it has been repudiated, rejected, and resisted by this, mass proliferation of, Igbo Jews, numbering over 80 million of them. Some people are still in church. They are still, scrutinizing the re-emergence, not emerging for the first time, the re-emergence of their brothers, from the closet into, Judaism. So that's going to be the fulcrum around which my podcast is going to revolve today. And I have practiced Judaism for almost the rest of my life in one form or the other. Sometimes I find myself in a church, thinking I was gonna, see some form of, Judaism. Sometimes I've gone to, synagogues. But right now, God just spoke to me to completely, discountenance and disregard anything that has to do with church, even though I've been ordained as a priest, as a pastor. But that was just it was just a kind of structure. It was a kind of preparatory ground for my being launched into mainstream Judaism. Very soon I'm going to be training as a rabbi. But as you can see the way I'm dressed, I have my zizit, which is a reminder, which helps me remember the covenant and the commandments of God, of Hashem, as he gave Moses all the 10 commandments to guide our lives and livelihood. And I'm also clad in the signature Orthodox Jewish garb of black pants and white shirt. Black pants, reminds all the Jews of all the lamentation, the melancholy, and all the misery Jews have experienced right from the period our forefathers, over 400, the period our forefathers spent in Israel as slaves for over 400 years, up to all the Holocaust, the massacres, the genocide that Jews have faced all around the world. And then the white shirt actually stands for purity. Regardless of all these sad and melancholic experiences, we still have purity of heart. We still, find ourselves in pure, pristine, pious space whenever we want to lift up the name of Hashem. So just to give you a little background about why I'm dressed like this. Usually I'm always dressed like this to keep alive my heritage, my Jewish, my Igbo Jewish heritage, and also of course I have my kippah, the plural is kippor. Just to let you know that I'm also studying my Hebrew. But some of the problems, they re-emerging, not emerging for the first time, Igbo Jews are experiencing include the provision of resources. We're not even talking about making aliyah, and I'm going to get into that. We're not talking about immigrating to to Israel, even though that's very, very critical and important. But we want to build the necessary structures. We want to learn Hebrew. We want to be providing resources like kippur, sisit. I don't know the plural for that. We want the prayer shawl. We want all the resources, the Humash, we want the Tanakh, we want the 5 books of the Bible that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. I hope I got it in the right order, which make up the Torah. So we want that. These things are expensive, and I was doing a research about how to buy a tefillin, the thing that looks like the torchlight used by coal miners. Some of them range into the thousands, and Igbos want these resources. We can afford them. We don't have as much resources as mainstream Jews. But we need to remind ourselves of some of the fundamental ethos of Judaism, which is each one reach one, each one teach one, each one give one. So that's one of the tenets of Judaism, where we need to reach out to the Igbo Jews in Nigeria. The reason why most of them are still stuck in churches, and that's not where their heart is because they don't have resources. They don't have anybody to support them and lift them up. The story of Igbo Jews is the story of the Ethiopian eunuch, writ large. The Ethiopian eunuch, I remind you, had an encounter with Philip, Apostle Philip, in the desert leading from Jerusalem to Gaza. And the Ethiopian eunuch was reading a verse in the book of Isaiah. And then the Spirit of God led Philip to him and asking him, "Do you understand what you're reading?" And the Ethiopian eunuch retorted How can I understand what I'm reading? Except somebody guides me. So that is the story of the Igbo Jews writ large. How can we understand Judaism after our forefathers, were dispersed when the first and second temples fell over, approximately 3,000 years right now? We don't know except somebody guides us. And I really like the work being done by the Kulanu non-profit organization, and Shaveh Israel, led by Michael Cohen, not Michael Cohen, Michael Freund, a gentleman who has done extraordinary work in identifying and rescuing Jewish communities. We're not talking about Igbo Jews immigrating in mass right now, even though nobody can dismiss that. It's going to come in Easter, due season. But we're just talking about lifting them up and giving them resources. And Kulanu has provided resources, and some other Jewish organizations have also, to their credit, have also provided resources, and we want to keep up with the momentum. And we in the diaspora are also doing our best to support them and lift them up. But our finances are finite. We don't have as much resources as the mainstream Jews. So it's important for us to remember the mass exodus of Jews from churches into synagogues in Nigeria and elsewhere, and even though some of these synagogues are in decrepit, makeshift, desolate, structures, but the most important thing is that they are happy lifting up the name of Hashem and praising God in their own way. So what we see unfolding, in these re-emerging Igbo Jewish synagogues is a radical identification of Judaism within the context of the African space, and without the institutional structures, without the institutional matrix to support these re-emerging Igbo Jewish communities, they are gonna flounder, fall, and falter. But we gotta keep in mind that Jews always help one another, regardless of the color of their skin. And that brings me to a statement credited to one Rabbi Yishak, Yosef, who described blacks as monkeys. I'm not sure if he understands that there are almost 80 million Igbo Jews in Nigeria, and if you begin to use such a rhetorical, language of, that has an undercurrent of, black homophobia, that adds another layer of complication to the anxieties and difficulties Igbo Jews are currently experiencing, in terms of in terms of being accepted by the mainstream Jewish communities. Now when Jews describe other Jews as monkeys, the same seed of Abraham, then that can excite significant and serious conversation. It might even lead us to stand in the mirror and take a good look at ourselves, because we are of the same seed of Abraham. We need to pull back a little bit and watch our rhetorics and our oratorical nuances, because there are 80 million Igbo Jews and they are not monkeys. So because what it means is that even some members of the mainstream Jewish communities that are considering embracing Igbo Jews, they might start thinking twice. Oh well, if 80 million monkeys are allowed to come into Israel, then they're gonna ravage all the banana plantations. They're gonna destroy all the crops, and then there's gonna be a bad agricultural harvest during the time Igbo Jews are allowed to come into Israel. And then again, and then the idea of conducting some kind of genealogy testing amongst people who are not even identified as Igbos, because Nnewi is a small enclave with a proliferation of aliens, people who are not Igbos, and chances are that people walking on the street may have been rounded up and then their samples may have been rounded up and asked to give their blood, saliva, or semen sample to be tested as Jews, and then of course the result is going to be clearly negative, because that's not how you conduct a research of this very important nature. And then even though that the genealogy testing is flawed at so many levels, and somebody still had the guts to come to national television and the public sphere on the internet to declare Igbo Jews non-Jews. You see, this has policy and policy implication as well as existential consequences, and I'm going to unpack all of that. Policy implications range from the fact that many governments, will now move in against Igbo Jews, by closing down their synagogues, by removing them from places of worship, because the word is out that after all, the scientific method, in quote, has proven without beyond reasonable doubt that we are not Jews. And then it has existential consequences. In the sense that many of these Igbo Jewish synagogues, have under their employment, drivers, cleaners, cantors, synagogue workers, and they are going to be pushed out of their employment, and their families are gonna suffer. So and we can see some of the collateral damages ranging from that pronouncement. Like in Nigeria now, a lot of Igbo Jews are being rounded up and arrested and charged to court because initially the authorities thought these were Jews, but somebody came along and said, no, you are not Jews anymore. So the authorities said, well, you don't have any more legitimacy to parade yourself as Jews. They are being rounded up, they are being incarcerated, they are being harassed and hounded. So that's problematic at different levels. I just wanted to like slip that in before I move on with this podcast. Like I said, I've created a playlist where you guys can go and look at a lot of the new Igbo synagogues that are springing up all over the place, and then you can see Igbos praising God and in different ways, and then I wanted to also touch on the fact that the question of Igbo Jewishness has been litigated since the turn of the 17th century. Even before Ola Oda Ukwiano wrote his book, The Interesting Narrative of Ola Oda Ukwiano, and his name was not really Ola Oda. Igbos don't name their offspring Ola Oda, or his name was actually Ola Judah. Ukwiano. We're not sure of what Ukwiano means. It's probably Ikuano, a certain Igbo, local government and township called Ikuano. But Igbos don't name their children Ola Oda. It means Ola Judah. Ola means jewelry or some kind of ornament. Ola Judah. That is Judah mean the kingdom of Judah. So Ola Judah means the jewel of Judah. That's the name of that man's name. He wasn't Elijah. He was known as Gustavus Vasa. That was his slave name. But his real name was Ola Judah. And we have information that when he was captured as a slave, he was asked his name. He said his name was Ola Judah. And then the Gentile slave masters could not fathom the idea of sleeping under the same roof with a Jew. So they decided to destroy his identity. They decided to expunge some letters of his name by removing the J from Judah and named him Ola Oda. His name is Ola Judah. Ola Judah means the Jew of Judah. Ola means jewel. It could be gold. Ola Edo. It could be gold or Ola silver. It means Ola Judah. For example, in my own family, is known as Abba. The original name of my own family was Abba, means the father. That was what my family was known as in ancient Israel. But when the temples fell and the Igbos found themselves in the southeast of Nigeria, and there was a vacuum because the Igbo Jews were frightened. They could not practice Judaism openly. And then the English missionaries found a vacuum and began to convert them, violently. It was a shotgun conversion. These conversions were not they were not voluntary. They were not peacefully done. So my family's name is Abba. ABBA. It means the father. So now they removed the AB and left the BA, and then my family is now known as ITIBA. We don't even know the meaning of ITIBA. We don't know what it means. But one of my uncles, before he lived for almost 105 years, he told me our original name was Abba, meaning the father. And then when the missionaries came, they sponged some parts of the letters and some parts of the syllables of our name. They removed the AB and left us with the BA, and then they stuck in ITIBA. We don't know what ITIBA means. And then another name of my family is Ezenwa, which comes from one of the children of God, is born, easy, B-O-N, Ezenwa. So you can see the Jewish connections there. Abba, the father, is born, Ezenwa. I don't know the Jewish meaning of is born, but that's where our name Ezenwa came from, which means the child that shall wear the crown. So you can see Judah, the Jewish kings always had crown. Jews always act like kings and aristocrats. So you can see that Ola Judah was his real name, not Ola Oda, because Oda means Oda is just like some kind of spice. Medieval Igbo women used to cook to alleviate the pain and suffering of childbirth. They don't use that spice anymore. It's called Oda. So no Igbo man would name his child Ola Oda. He would name his child Ola Judah, the jewel of Judah. Similarly, in my own background, I've already articulated all the connections, all the affinities, all the affiliations, with Judaism when it comes to my family name. I made some notes here, and Igbo Jews were the first to be captured as slaves in Egypt. They were the first to be shipped. Keep in mind that all the Jewish slaves in Egypt did not go at the same time. They went in batches, just like slaves came to America in the Middle Passage for 400 years. It took a lot of Igbos to be shipped to the New World. Similarly, the Jewish slaves in Egypt did not arrive in Egypt in one day. They went in batches, but Igbo Jews were the first to arrive in Egypt. And they were not house slaves. They were the ones who built the pyramids and the Sphinx at Giza, the pyramids in Alexandria and elsewhere. It was the Igbo Jews, because they were great artisans. They had architectural acuity and acumen. And there is a passage in the Bible where Pharaoh stopped issuing straws to the Jews to make with which to make bricks for the building of the pyramids and the temples and the palaces. He denied them access to straws. He said, "You are now going to access your own straws, and then you are still going to meet your daily quota of bricks." He told the Jewish slaves that he was no longer going to, and there was no reason for denying them access to government straws with which to make bricks. Yet they were supposed to meet their daily quota of making bricks. And many of the Jews who lacked imagination, who were not creative, were being beaten because they could not meet their quota of daily production, daily brick production. It was the Igbos. Because we have imagination, we went into the cornfields and maize fields to pull up strawbles. Strawbles were, the remnant of the stalk of the corn. After the corn or the maize has been harvested, there is a foot-long remnant that's sticking from the ground. Igbos will go and pull them out and turn them into straw. With that, our forefathers were still able to meet their daily quota of brick production. So they didn't fall under the crack of the whip of the slave masters of the Egyptians. So we were the go-to slaves in Egypt during the 400 years of Jewish slavery in Egypt. In the book of Genesis into Exodus, just to remind you that Igbo slaves have proven themselves over and over again. Even when they were being sent to the New World, they instead of being slaved once again, they had to commit mass suicide. They had to drown in the river instead of being enslaved again, because our forefathers had a bitter experience being slaves in Egypt. So they had to commit mass suicide in the east coast of the United States. I think probably in North Carolina or South Carolina. I don't know the town, but it's a coastal town. So as soon as the slave ship landed in the New World, the Igbos try to take control of the ship. Rather than being enslaved again, they all jumped into the river and drowned. And then it also has connection with a certain movie produced by a Jewish man named Steven Spielberg. I think the movie is called Amistad. It was the Igbo Jews that tried to wrestle control of that boat, and many of them were massacred. We know how to prove ourselves. So I know that even since the 1700s, the question of Igbo Jewishness has been litigated over and over again, to the extent that Olajuda Ekwueno wrote a book about it, where he pointed out some similarities between Igbo customs and the Jewish canons, customs and conventions and mores. And then I know, after Israel was constituted in 1948, many Israeli prime ministers sent out delegates to go to Igbo land to on fact-finding mission to find out if they are submerged, because we're not a lost tribe. Even though the word lost has been bandied around, we are submerged. Submerged means we are obscure. We have been in hiding, but we're not lost, because anything that is lost, you never can find it. But we have been submerged, and then and every time they come, they write their report. The report sits there, and because the facts keep emerging every year. It might not be every year, every decade, every century. New facts emerge about dispersed Jewish communities. I know in 1975 or so, another prime minister sent out. In 1969, in the heat of the Nigerian Civil War, there was a delegation to find out whether there are similarities within Igbo customs, conventions, canon, and mores, and to see if there are similarities and parallels with Jewish ethos. And then they write a report. The report sits there, and then even non-profit organizations like Shaveh Israel has developed a sudden interest. Kulani has been doing a great work in outreach and providing resources. A certain Rabbi Birnbaum has shown interest. Daniel Lees is a Swiss Israeli anthropologist, has written a book, chronicling the existential, similarities between Igbo Jews and the mainstream Jewish communities. And then, people are, showing interest. A certain Christopher Shomia, rabbi, I think he's from Canada, has been, in the vanguard. He's been the bulwark for propagating and articulating, the way in which Igbo customs, conventions, canon, mores have similarities with the broader Jewish ethos and tenets. But one interesting thing is that we cannot take orders from anybody except we hear from the Rabbinate Council of Israel. That is the foremost authority that can declare somebody a Jew or non-Jewish, or the Israeli Interior Ministry or the Ministry of the Diaspora. These people take their responsibilities, they take their duties with a lot of due diligence. That's why you don't see them coming out to say that community is not Jewish, this community is not Jewish, because facts are always emerging. Until the facts are out, you cannot speak definitively that a community is not Jewish or it is Jewish. I know that Igbos are Jewish. The facts have come out since the 1700s, but there are a lot of extraneous factors that play into all of this. For example, Igbos are black, and a lot of mainstream Jews have their reservations about the pigment, the epidural, the skin color, so some also have conservative viewpoints. For example, a religious luminary describing blacks as monkeys, cannot allow blacks to immigrate to Israel as Jews. You see, so these are some of the complications that tend to bedevil the Igbo quest for recognition as Jews. And then our sheer numbers, we are approximately 80 million people. Not and if Israel is a country of almost 8 million people, some people who don't have an economic mindset might think 80 million people will overwhelm the mainstream Caucasian community. But an economist will tell you that large population has its advantages. For example, America is approximately 300 million people. Do you have an idea the kind of imagination, the kind of creativity that has emerged from the United States of America because of this large population? There was a time copper was used to lay the structure for telecommunication, for internet, for cable TV. But out of this 300 million United States population, 1% discovered fiber optics as an alternative. Fiber optics became cheaper and easily available to be used for internet connectivity. The same thing with China with over 1.3 billion people. Do you know the kind of imagination, the kind of creativity, the kind of innovation that has emerged from China and India with 1.3 million people? So there are advantages with when you harness a large population properly. People bring their different ideas. People bring their different experiences, their different knowledge base, their different skill set to bring about national development. So a large population is not the devil you think. Rather, it's going to help lift up a nation. And Igbos have a lot of imagination. They have proven themselves in entrepreneurship, in trading, in medicine, in law. They are all over the place in the diaspora. And in every country they find themselves, they have not caused problem. Rather, they have contributed immensely to national development. I just wanted to point that out so that those people who think, 80 million Igbos will be problematic. No, they are not going to be problematic. They're going to help the Israeli community, Israeli nation be the best, reach its full potential, because these people have skill set. For example, myself as a Igbo Jewish prophet and high priest, I have background in almost every sphere of human endeavor. I have background in business administration. I have background in education. I have background in special education. I have background in higher education. I have a doctorate degree. Name it. I have competencies in every which way you wanna think about somebody having competencies, but I don't want to blow my own trumpet. But the point I'm trying to make is that we need to calm down and see the the opportunities and the options that can emerge if we work together as a community. But right now, we are just advocating for leveraging resources for the Igbo, Igbo Jews in Nigeria, so that they can learn the Torah, they can learn Hebrew, they can, have all these resources to help them, worship Adonai, worship Yahweh, worship Hashem in the right way. Even though I've been reading a lot of narrative and literature, and some people are saying that there's really no monolithic way of Jewish worship. Even though Orthodox Jews might say, "Oh, this is the right way," Reformists might say, "Oh, well, this is the best way." Reconstructionists might say,